for the opening statements, day one. Elizabeth, thank you so much for coming out really quickly to talk about this. So first, I want you to set the stage. The whole scene out there. You had almost trouble getting into the courthouse today. Talk to us about what you're seeing.
Oh yeah, I crashed out a little bit this morning, Jesse, thinking I was not about to get inside that courtroom just because of just how crazy it is. I mean, you can just see the lines just going all the way back with media. It's going all the way back just with the public, just so some people could either, one, watch the trial, get a glimpse of Diddy's family members coming in and outside of the courtroom, and even as well as see as his attorneys, whose members include Brian Steele, Mark Agnifilo, Mark Garagos playing in kind of that defensive advisory type of role. So it's crazy out here, especially, you know, it's Diddy, it's high profile celebrities, it's salacious allegations. Then on top of that, he's facing a lot of time behind bars. So you can understand why so many people of the public wanted to be here and wanted to get here super early so that way they could attend. I even heard somebody was standing in line and was auctioning off how much that they would give to somebody else in line for up to $500, $600. So that's just a lot of people here. Now, as far as who was inside the courtroom today, still is a lot of famous faces, or well, let me not say famous faces, but a lot of people that we are definitely familiar with here at Law&Crime. You have Mark Garagos in the courtroom, Karen Agnifilo, who is the wife of Mark Agnifilo, who's also representing Luigi as well too. You had Little Rod inside the courtroom today, and he's one who had filed one of the many civil claims against Diddy as well too. He came in probably, I would say, maybe a little like 8:30-ish, kind of came in with his sunglasses, 2 chains on, as well as his attorney was inside that courtroom as well too. You have all of Diddy's children, with the exception of his youngest daughter, Love, were inside that courtroom. So that includes Quincy Brown, Justin Combs, Christian Combs, Delilah Combs, Chance Combs, Jesse Combs. Chance's mother was inside that courtroom. Diddy's mother was inside that courtroom. The daughter of Diddy's youngest daughter was inside that courtroom. And then you have the twins' caregiver, who is also best friends with Kim Porter as well too. So a lot of people were inside that courtroom as well for just opening statements, just to get this jury selected, because it went down from 43 to 18 today. And so a lot of people were inside that courtroom. It was body to body, and what can you expect? It's Diddy's first day of trial, so this was, you know, just a little bit of what we were expecting today, but it's crazy out here.
And I will encourage everybody to check out what you're posting on X, Twitter. Because earlier today you actually posted that you saw Rodney Little Rod Jones, one of the first people to sue Sean Combs. He was outside the courthouse. We were always expecting who would end up showing up during the course of this trial. Talk to us about the jury. Who is this jury? What can you tell about how they're reacting so far to opening statements? I mean, NBC has reported you have one juror who's a 69-year-old male, another juror who's a 31-year-old male, another one 51-year-old male. You have a 42-year-old female, and they have different numbers to them. But what are you determining based on the jury? What's the makeup, and how are they positioning? How are they reacting to the opening statement so far?
Yeah, well, kind of a hard question to answer, I should say, just because of where I was sitting inside the gallery. It was really hard to kind of see each and every single one of their faces when both sides were presenting opening statements. But what I did see from being inside that gallery was some people jotting notes, some people just very much intently listening to both Emily Johnson for the prosecution as well as Tony Garagos for the defense. But as far as the makeup goes, I kind of just took their jury numbers and compared them to the notes that I took last week when I was here for jury selection. You have one who's a scientist, one whose brother is a security guard. He knew Diddy was arrested but didn't know the charges. You have one person who's part of a union job. He works for the Department of Corrections. Another person who is now retired but previously used to work at Verizon. You had another person whose friend is a detective, son is a security guard. But, you know, as far as the defense was kind of making their objections today as far as jury selection goes, and, you know, just kind of the objections they made that, you know, the government was striking 7 black jurors, that type of thing. There were still black jurors that are going to be serving on this panel who are going to be making making the decisions going into those deliberations. So from what I saw of the jury makeup as a whole, it really was a diverse group of men and women of all different ages, all different walks of life as well too.
So we hear some commentary in the back right there. Obviously, I think there's going to be a lot of commentary when it comes to this case. But Elizabeth, we counted up right now. I believe as we're looking into this, we're counting up how many men there are. I believe there's 8 men, 4 women on this jury, all different ages. None of them younger than 30 years old. Take that for what it is. A little bit of older individuals as well. But I think it's really interesting when you talk about what we saw today with opening statements, right? And by the way, just to reiterate something that you mentioned before, the first argument we heard from the defense today was saying that the prosecution, they raised what's called a Batson challenge to their preemptory challenges, saying you're striking jurors based on race, which is improper. The judge didn't side with it. They got a jury selected. Talk about opening statements. I want to start with the prosecution, Emily Johnson. What was the main theme of today, and did you learn something new? And Elizabeth, you're going to have to talk a little bit louder because that guy behind you is incredibly loud. So what was the theme of Emily Johnson's opening statement, and did you learn anything new? Anybody that might testify?
Yeah, so, obviously we've been following this case from the beginning, from the time that Cassie had first dropped her civil lawsuits against Diddy. And so a lot of this stuff that we were listening to from Emily Johnson was expected, right? She starts off with saying, this is Sean Combs. He's a cultural icon, a businessman. He's larger than life. But then she went and kind of talked about the defendant's crimes, the defendant being Diddy, that went past 20 years, kidnapping, allegations of arson, allegations of drug trafficking, sex crimes, obstruction. They were talking about one specific night where the defendant was on the hunt for girlfriend Cassie. So I was pretty surprised there that they just went out of the gates and already had just named her. I was assuming when she were going to be taking the stand, that's when the jurors would know her name, and that's when she would be introduced as, alleged victim number 1. But the government came out and just automatically just named her. They talked about the incident where Diddy found out Cassie was seeing another man, and that Diddy took his gun and his bodyguard, and Diddy threatened to allegedly kill this man that Cassie was with. Emily Johnson talked about how he had beat Cassie so brutally that he also had to take control of her. He kept videos of Cassie sleeping with escorts and threatened to use them against her. These are the types of things we had already known and were already kind of painted out inside those indictments that the government had written up and that type of sort. Diddy referring himself as a king, which is kind of ironic because he has a giant king crown on the back of his neck. Emily Johnson spoke about the defendant using his inner circle to manipulate women that for a while he watched, how his bodyguards kind of played, or bodyguards as well as employees kind of played a role into this alleged RICO conspiracy as well too, and she made it a point to say this case is not about a celebrity's private sex preferences, because that was something that the defense definitely kind of chalked it up to being just, that he lived an alternative lifestyle, that type of sort, and we'll talk about that more in a second. While there has been a lot of reports about victim 3 and where her whereabouts are or anything like that, the defense didn't talk about alleged victim number 3. Instead, they kept it pretty short and to the point. They talked about Cassie, they talked about Jane, who we presume to be the other alleged victim. In this case, the government was talking about, the freak-offs being also named Wild King Night, something that we had also known about, as well as even just simply as, hotel nights as well, too. Allegations of flying escorts across state lines, out of the country, into the country, that type of thing, that Diddy had demands for the staff to set up his rooms in advance, lighting, lube, cash for escorts, drugs for both Diddy and the women that were participating in these types of events. Women had to dress in lingerie, had to wear white nails, tall heels, something that Cassie had pointed out in her civil lawsuit that was later settled. Talking about the drug use. Then they went into kind of, the allegations specifically geared towards Cassie and just how, the defendant had met Cassie. They had a 17-year age difference. Cassie was initially given a 10-album deal, and obviously that never happened as far as putting out a whole bunch of different albums and that type of sort. And so these were types of things that we had already known about. I think some of the more interesting points also go to Jane, as far as the other alleged victim. She was a single mom. She met Diddy around 2020 when Diddy was single, when Jane was single, but Diddy was seeing other people. Diddy introduced Jane to the freak-offs, and she had tried one just to kind of make him happy, and then just kind of kept going into this repetitive cycle of doing these freak-offs, wild hotel wild hotel nights, that type of sort, just to kind of appease him, that Jane didn't want to do these freak offs, and that she had tried at even one point to hire men on her own that worked in the porn industry so she could pick the men. Diddy made her, these escorts not wear condoms when they, allegedly participated in these types of activities. So these were just kind of the big things that were pointed out as far as the government. And Jesse, do you want me to go into the defense? Because the defense was pretty interesting as well, too.
Before you go into the defense, as I was reading about the reporting today, it was the first confirmation that Cassandra Ventura is victim one in this case. We always guessed it, we always surmised it, now we have a definitive answer. And by the way, I think it was either the prosecution or the defense who mentioned that she's going to probably testify this week as we wonder who the first witnesses are going to be. And also this reference to Mia, who is Sean Combs' personal assistant, that is maybe going to provide some important testimony in this case. Now, before we go to the defense, real quick, as though you're looking at all these people that are behind you right now, Elizabeth, are these all reporters? Are these all fans? Are these all people who are supporting Sean Combs, who are not supporting Sean Combs? Are these just interested spectators? I'm trying to get a sense of the people that are walking behind you right now.
Yeah, so obviously I was trying not to pay attention so much because it's really so many people, but it's really just kind of a common mix. It's a lot of people who are here with the media. You have field producers, you have social media producers, and pretty much every outlet across the country is here right now inside that courtroom. I would say there's too many supporters beyond that one guy just kind of yelling, and he had been kind of saying some pretty vile things to us as reporters. So, we're trying too much not to pay attention to him as much as possible. As far as the family goes, right before we did this hit, we saw the family kind of get into a Sprinter van and kind of drive off, maybe to get something to eat, maybe to decompress, because, think about it, Jesse, his children were inside that courtroom, especially his daughters were inside that courtroom hearing about their father, booking escorts and allegedly beating women and that type of sort. So maybe it was just the time that all the family members just had to get out of here, get away from this media circus. But for the most part, it's a good mix of both media and just the general public who are just genuinely curious.
So Elizabeth, I know you have to jump back into that courtroom because they're going to start up in about 15 minutes. Real quick, if you could summarize the defense's opening statement, some highlights there.
Yeah, the defense's opening statements were pretty, we were kind of expecting them. They were going to have to admit that Diddy had been physically violent towards women in the past. They were going to have to admit that Diddy had this type of temper, that, he participated in taking these types of drugs, and that his temper was especially bad whenever he was on drugs and alcohol. There was a point in the openings where Diddy stood up when Tenny Garagos was introducing him to the jury. For the most part, even throughout opening statements, he kind of sat there calmly. He looked at the jurors. He looked at Tenny Garagos, who again provided the opening statements on the defense's behalf. The defense was kind of harping on the fact that the government has no place in his bedroom, something that we had talked about many of times. Just how they're kind of painting this as somebody, who did bad things on one hand, but were these bad things criminal? And that was essentially what the defense's argument was there. They said that the defense will see domestic violence in this trial, but while they do take it seriously, they say it's not sex trafficking. So I feel like they're trying to divide this line between, this being a domestic violence spat or domestic violence toxic relationship type of thing, as opposed to these being actual criminal acts that Diddy was allegedly committing and that type of thing. The defense was saying that these alleged victims were strong, capable women, that they made choices that were for adults, they were free of choice, and they came with both pros and cons, and that type of thing. And then they were kind of talking a lot about how Diddy was jealous and how, other partners or his other relationship partners. So, for example, Cassie. They also mentioned Gina, somebody I had talked about in some stories I had done. She had talked about how Diddy was physically violent with her in a podcast episode, for example. And so that was kind of her mention there beyond, what the government was talking about as far as alleged victims in this case and that type of sort. They had mentioned Kim Porter and how Cassie was jealous of Kim Porter's relationship with Diddy and that type of thing. And then everything kind of ended as soon as Kim Porter had passed away. Cassie went to her memorial service, and that was the last time she had seen Diddy, even prior to her expectation that she'll be inside that courtroom testifying. These jurors are going to see some of these freak off videos, but they say that it was taken from Cassie's devices, not Diddy's devices. And so, you know, they talked about Mia, for example, who had worked with Diddy for a number of years, and the defense says, you know, they want jurors to evaluate her motive to testify. When they were talking about Jane Doe, it was the same thing, that this was a jealous relationship. Jane wanted to be more public, whereas Diddy, you know, he flaunted other relationships that weren't with Jane and that type of thing. So those were some of the biggest takeaways from the defense's openings, as well as the government's openings as well, too.
These are the arguments we anticipated. Now, obviously, there's a lot more detail to it. We're hearing it in an official capacity. And these jurors, while they might have heard certain aspects of this case, this is the first time, presumably, both arguments are being positioned to them for the first time in such a very particular way. And this is opening statements. It's not evidence, but it is the start, the official start of Sean Combs' criminal trial. Elizabeth Millner, thank you so much for reporting. Go back into that courthouse. Stay safe out there. There's a lot of interesting characters you're seeing running around. But thanks, Elizabeth. Appreciate it.